Psalm 126. When Yahweh brought back the captive ones of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with joyful shouting. Then they said among the nations, Yahweh has done great things for them. Yahweh has done great things for us. We are glad. Restore our captivity, O Yahweh, as the streams in the south. Those who sow in tears shall reap with joyful shouting. He who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. Basically, this means share your testimony with people because they need to know the wonderful things that God does. That last verse there, verse 6, where it says, he who goes to and fro weeping, carrying his bag of seed, shall indeed come again with a shout of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. The seed is like, hey, all the ingredients are here for God to bless if he so chooses, but he hasn't yet. Seed is not something that you can eat and sustain your family on. But you plant it, God does what he does, upholding nature. He blesses your crop. Now you're bringing in sheaves of wheat where you can sustain a family and a society. And so it's like, basically it's saying, God has everything in place that he normally uses to bless people. We're just asking him to follow through on it now. And this is saying he will. Now, does God bless everybody all the time in every way that we ask? Certainly not. If you've been at Grace and Truth longer than 6 minutes, you know that we have to pretty regularly hammer on the prosperity gospel these days in this culture because that is a teaching that's out there. That God will bless you if you do the right things, say the right things, and believe hard enough and things like that. God is sovereign. He's in charge of things, and he gets to decide when to bless and when not to. But the point here is that even when his people are in exile, let's say, or undergoing whatever kind of struggles we go through in a broken and fallen and sin-filled world, the end of the matter for his children is good, is blessing, is rejoicing. And that actually lasts forever, right? So there's all of these passages. There's the 2 Corinthians 4 and 11 and 12, and there's the Romans 8, 28 and 29 and 30, and all of these passages that talk about exactly this. You're going to suffer now, but God. Right? And he keeps track of all of these things and makes sure that in eternity, the good so far outweighs the suffering that he's called us to go through, that even in that, he'll preserve us and he'll strengthen us, but the good so far outweighs that it's worth it and even a good thing to put up with the suffering now. These guys in Psalm 126, these are Jews who have seen their culture go into captivity before. God has delivered them. We see this in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah and all of these exilic and post-exilic portions of the Bible. And they've seen the captives come back to Jerusalem. And they've also seen various other persecutions and diasporas, which means a spreading out. And so he's saying, well, you've done this before, please do it again. And look at how he describes what happened last time he did it. He said that the Lord has done great, this is what the people are shouting among the nations. The Lord, Yahweh, has done great things for them. Yahweh has done great things for us. We are glad, right? Share your testimony with people. Tell people the great things that God has done for you. I was talking with somebody last Sunday, one of our guys here, and we were talking about our testimonies. And, I said, you might have heard that joke before about like, oh man, that guy's testimony was fantastic. I don't have a cool story like that. When really his story was just horrifying, right? Like he went through all this terrible stuff. But now it makes a great testimony. But I was kind of born in church, and so it's like, all right, I was raised as a Christian even before I was born again. So when I became a Christian, it wasn't like I was leaving the whole old Dustin back there in terms of my day-to-day ethics, right? I had a new heart, I had a new view on things, I started to love new things that God loved and so on, but it was one continuous Christian upbringing for me. So what's the testimony there, right? I mean, we can talk about what God saved me from eternally, and that's the most important stuff, but in this life, what do I tell people God has done for me that my parents weren't already, by the grace of God, doing for me before I was born again? And it took me a few years to kind of figure out, like, how do I actually share my testimony? And there's two ways I came about sharing it in a helpful setting, especially for people that I'm dealing with that are struggling with things. One is, to put it kind of sarcastically, God saved me from religion. right? Because since I was raised in a Christian home, then I knew all the Christian practices and I had the Bible memory, and I was raised in a fundamentalist church. And so we had we had a lot of Bible in our heads, which can puff up and lead to pride and things like that. And then when God saves somebody, he says, hey, you don't have this all figured out. You are not the Lord, right? And so he's saving you from Phariseeism, from the idea that your religious practices are the totality of what it means to have a relationship with God. He saves you from works righteousness, right? So that's one thing. As he said, no, little Dustin, here's the gospel, the actual gospel, not just a checklist that your parents have faithfully and wonderfully taught you to do. That's not going to save you, though. Good stuff. It's not going to get you into heaven. Here's the gospel. Well, that's one. He saved me from empty, dead religion, dead letter religion, as Charles Spurgeon would call it. The other is that I'm a second-generation Christian. Both of my parents are first-generation Christians, right? And so they had a lot of struggles that they kind of figured things out and then handed to me and my sister the finished, figured out, or almost figured out product. And so I'm a product of grace in previous generations. So I am living proof that the gospel can change a lineage. My dad gets saved. He kind of accidentally leads my mom to Christ on a date they were having before they got married. I don't really know the whole story, but it sounded kind of funny. They were listening to a Bible tape from a teacher in Texas. And I guess my mom started asking questions. My dad answered them or something. And, voila, my mom comes to Christ. So now my parents are both Christians. Then my sister and I are raised in a Christian home. And now my sister has kids, I've got kids, and we're raising our kids in a Christian home. So an entire lineage was changed by the gospel. And I'm living proof that God changes the direction across generations to the third and the fourth, and by the grace of God, if he doesn't come back first, to the 1,000th generation, right? So tell people what God has done for you, because his word is sufficient and his promises are good and you can trust them. But it's really, really good for people who are struggling to believe or who don't believe. It's really good for them to see God follow through on these promises on occasion. Now, we stand on faith, right? We walk by faith, not by sight. And your testimony, your story, is not going to make the gospel any more true to somebody than it already is. But it can be an on-ramp for them to kind of put some handles, some flesh and bones onto this story that they're struggling to believe, right? Of Jesus living a perfect life, dying, raising for the dead, us having eternal life. Your story can be the on-ramp for them to just comprehend and say, okay, I understand what this might look like now. So, this week, you're seeing this on a Monday morning probably, right? This week, I just want you to think about, do you have opportunities to share with somebody what Christ has done for you? And your testimony, it's very important to specify, your testimony is not just your story. It is the gospel through the lens of your story, okay? It is your story as a lead into what Christ does for everybody else. Because if somebody comes away knowing your story, that might be good for them, it might be encouraging, but your story doesn't save people, right? God saves people through the gospel. And so we want to tell our story, and we want to have that lead into the gospel and say, God does this kind of thing, and he'll do other things, maybe similar, maybe different, but God is very real and very active, and he'll do other things for you. Psalm 126, man. Share your testimony. It's a good thing. God gets glory, and people get saved.